A huge AT&T data breach, as well as many more data breaches. Google unironically didn't have a terrible week, juicy Signal news, and more. Welcome to Surveillance Report 186, where we're dedicated to keeping you private and secure with the latest news in the past week. I'm Henry from Techlore.
I'm Nathan from The New Oil.
And we still have our normal promo segment. So if you're somebody who wants to support this podcast, keep it going for free to all of you so we can keep doing this every week and keeping you all safe, go ahead and join our Patreon down below at patreon.com/surveillancepod. If you don't like Patreon, totally get it. We're also on Liberapay, and we also accept Monero tips. Though keep in mind that all of our perks are over on Patreon, which include an ad-free segment. So you don't get these things at the beginning and end of every episode. You don't have to skip anything. And you also have an uncut version, essentially, where you get a lot more analysis and fun things that we talk about along the way. With that said, the highlight story this week. Hackers steal text and call records of nearly all AT&T customers. This is a really big story that I saw really make a lot of news this week. So the compromised data includes files containing AT&T records of calls and texts of nearly all AT&T cellular customers, mobile virtual network operators as well, which is pretty much, for people who don't know, if you use something like Mint Mobile, you're still using T-Mobile, and AT&T also does the same thing where they let other people use their network. So that impacts other people as well, not just specifically AT&T customers. This impacts landline customers between May 1st of 2022 through October 31st, 2022. Some of the stolen data also impacted records from January 2nd, 2023 for a very small number of customers. So this is pretty unprecedented for AT&T and the telecom industry more broadly. Metadata, which shows what numbers a customer interacted with, is typically only available to law enforcement in a targeted way under legal process. Here, outside hackers managed to steal the data themselves. In its announcement, AT&T said it believes that authorities have already apprehended one of the people involved in the breach. So the person's been caught, but we don't really know how they shared this data, who else has the data, and either way, the data was stolen. So this is part of the reason why, we'll get to more analysis down the road, but this is part of the reason why we believe in not collecting such sensitive info in the first place. But anyway, AT&T said the stolen metadata did not include timestamps of calls or texts, meaning that hackers could not see when AT&T customers dialed a certain number, but they could see which number was called or texted, information that's still very sensitive and personal, as it could tie, I'm assuming it could tie a ton of people together and start networking things very easily. And AT&T points out it's possible to use publicly available tools to then discover the identity of a person who owns a particular phone number. And for people who want to know how effective this is, create a new Facebook account with your personal phone number, and Facebook will automatically know all your friends and suggest them to you, because other people have their number in their contact list. And then if somebody has enough data points, it's really easy to tell who knows who. It's not actually very hard to do. So AT&T told 404 Media that the third-party cloud service that was targeted was actually Snowflake. So we've been talking about Snowflake on this podcast now for a long time. Just a fun little detail there. Now, the FBI confirmed it worked closely with AT&T in response to the breach and said the parties delayed the breach notification on national security and public safety concerns. It'd be nice to know a little bit more about that and why they think it was a national security concern. That is the situation. In terms of analysis, I'm sure Nate has thoughts as well, but for me, the big takeaway here is ensuring you're using services that don't have your information. For people new to the podcast, we believe pretty strongly not only in end-to-end encryption, but end-to-end encrypted services that also hide metadata, because then there is no risk. Not even the service itself has your data, so in the face of a breach, there's really nothing someone can hack nor hand over. So it's really good to prioritize services that know as little about you as possible. That's going to always put you in a better place, so you don't have to worry as much about this kind of stuff.
I'll throw it in the show notes, but just as a follow-up, there has been an American citizen who was arrested in Turkey who was linked to this breach already. That person was also indicted for breaking into T-Mobile in 2021, and for some reason told 404 Media in January that he wasn't concerned about being extradited. And just to clarify, because the wording you said on an earlier part, it affected all customers between May 1st and October 31st of 2022, not just landline customers. I think the big concern here is if you're a journalist, and a lot of journalists post their phone numbers publicly online. At least I'm noticing that nowadays to like, hey, do you have a tip? Do you have more information on this story? Like contact me on Signal or WhatsApp or whatever. Now you can look up who they were talking to in that window of time. So it mentions here the stolen data didn't include timestamps, but we have a window. And especially if you're like an investigative journalist, they're usually the ones doing like the most controversial and explosive stories that people might get harmed over. Those stories don't just happen in a week. They usually take a long time of research and talking to sources. And now you can kind of see who journalists have been talking to. Most phone numbers, as a lot of you guys know, especially SIM card numbers, you can just punch those into any Google search and people search websites will pop up by the hundreds to tell you everything you ever wanted to know about that phone number. So, and it also, like, even for non-journalists, it's, you know, we've mentioned before, there's always risks of doxing and this just gives them more sources to look up your social network. You know, even if my OPSEC is good and you can't tie me back to a home, if you can pull up my phone records and see who else I'm talking to, you can see coworkers, bosses, family members, friends, and I guarantee you none of them have probably even paid for a data removal service. That's like bottom of the barrel. If I'm lucky, I can get some of them using Bitwarden or Brave. So unfortunately, I think for 99% of people, this is one of those things that they're just going to be like, yeah, everything gets breached anyways. They're going to move on with their day. But there are going to be real world consequences for this. And it's going to suck for those people who do care and are affected, as well as those people who don't care right now, but will care in 5 years when this comes back to haunt them somehow. So like you were saying, big fan of services that just don't have the data in the first place and therefore can't breach it, can't sell it, can't get a warrant for it, so on and so forth. I will say, just on a personal note, I don't understand why this is going so much more viral than any other. Like, in my opinion, we have seen much, much worse data breaches. Maybe it's because of the scope of it. I don't know. But like, this story just was all over my newsfeed yesterday. And I don't understand what makes this one so special that everybody was having an absolute nuclear meltdown versus a different story. But I don't know, maybe I'm missing something here. Maybe I missed the explosive paragraph of the article.
I guess a couple things to add on, a little bit more nitty gritty. I do take issue with the timestamp claim, mainly because I believe it at face value, but I don't believe it beyond that, mainly because they know the window of time. So there's already some layer of time involved here. You know, we know exactly the window of when things were breached. And I don't think it's just a scrambled random data set. My assumption is at least the order or something is in some way ordered by time in a way that can at least signal or be cross-referenced with other data. You know, if somebody posted their personal number that they just set up for the first time on Twitter on July 2022, and then you see that number started becoming active then, and then it's just not hard to cross-reference certain data points. So I really want people to think about how there's a lot of other things going on. I think another reason why this might have gone viral is because it is a somewhat misleading headline. I feel like the headline implies that it leaked the actual SMS content, not just the metadata. But I feel like if they said metadata, then people would care less. Going back to our Q&A from last week, I think people care less about metadata than actual data.
I suppose, but I mean, even educated people who are familiar with the matter and like read the story, I've seen them talking about it too, and it's just I don't know. Or maybe it's a feedback loop where, like you said, like, because if you look up AT&T data breach right now, I just did it when I was trying to find the follow-up story. If you look up AT&T data breach right now, every single hit on the front page is some version of this story. Yeah, maybe it's like the media ran with this headline and then all the other people are just commenting because everyone else is talking about it. All right, so now we're going to move into our data breaches section, and this is another one of those weeks where there's literally like close to a dozen data breaches. So we're going to try something new this time, and instead of having a 20-minute data breach section, we're just going to cover the top 3 that we feel like were maybe the most interesting or the most important, and then we're just going to read the headlines for the rest, so you guys can go ahead and read the full articles if you want more info or you think you might have been impacted or whatever. And as always, we have sources in the show notes, so you can just go ahead and click on that. We'll start with the RockU 2024 breach, which is, it's not really a breach, it's a combo list, but it's 10 billion passwords in the largest compilation of all time. So the researchers who found this, I'm just going to quote the main paragraph that has like all the main information. The team cross-referenced passwords with data from Cybernews' leaked password checker, which revealed that these passwords came from a mix of old and new data breaches. In its essence, the leak is a compilation of real-world passwords used by individuals all over the world. Revealing that many passwords for threat actors substantially heightens the risk of credential stuffing attacks. And I do believe, if I remember correctly, I wrote this one down earlier in the week, so my memory's a little fuzzy, but I do think a lot of these were new. This isn't all just like stuff we already knew in one place. This is also a lot of new passwords we haven't seen before.
The next data breach is from Evolve Bank, and this data breach impacted 7.6 million Americans. And they say the funds of these people remain safe, but they said the attack had impacted several fintech customers, including Affirm, which is probably what you've seen when it's like, oh, pay for the next 12 months at only $12 a month when you try to buy something really pricey. Wise and Built were also two different companies, and they all confirmed that the Lockbit attack at Evolve impacted their customers as well. So the compromise was discovered on May 29th. The data breach notification says the initial breach occurred on February 9th. That's several months for people, giving the attackers 4 months, nearly 4 months, to dwell on the network. So they're now offering, in response to this, 2 years of credit monitoring and identity protection services for US residents and dark web monitoring service for international residents. That's really nice of them. Recipients must enroll by October 31st. And on that note, they have not said what types of data were included.
And the last big story we're going to cover is a spyware vendor who had another data breach, as they do. This one is called mSpy. They're a phone surveillance app that promotes itself as a way to track children or monitor employees. But I don't know if I included it here in the notes. They definitely knew what people were using it for. They knew. The article says, like most spyware, it is also widely used to monitor people without their consent. These kinds of apps are also known as stalkerware because people in romantic relationships often use them to surveil their partners without consent or permission. Unknown attackers stole millions of customer support tickets, including personal information, emails to support, and attachments, including personal documents, in May of 2024. While hacks of spyware purveyors are becoming increasingly common, they remain notable because of the highly sensitive personal information often included in the data, in this case about customers who use the service. And they mentioned that this includes requests from several senior-ranking U.S. military personnel, a serving U.S. federal appeals court judge, a U.S. government department's watchdog, and an Arkansas County Sheriff's Office seeking a free license to trial the app. They said that it also encompassed customer service records dating back to 2014, which were stolen from the spyware maker's Zendesk-powered customer support system.
I think we're going to do 3 at a time here, just headlines. So next one is Shopify denies it was hacked, links stolen data to a third-party app. Next one, Roblox vendor data breach exposes dev conference attendee info. And also, computer maker Zotac exposed customers' RMA info on Google search.
Next up, we have the city of Philadelphia says over 35,000 hit in a May 2023 breach. Fujitsu confirms customer data was exposed in a March cyber attack. And Advance Auto Parts data breach impacts 2.3 million people. And I'm pretty sure that's an update to a previous data breach from, I think, almost a couple months ago at this point.
All right, in the last 3 data breaches, Dallas County has been hit with data of 200,000 exposed in a 2023 ransomware attack. ARRL finally confirms ransomware gang stolen data in a cyber attack, and also Rite Aid confirms the data breach after a June ransomware attack.
All right, that'll take us into companies, and we're going to start off with some Google news. Google has extended Linux kernel support to keep Android devices secure for longer. If you're curious how this works, I recommend reading this article. It's not overly technical. It's just they spend a lot of time explaining how Google handles the kernel and how they handle pushing out the version of Android that other OEMs can copy and stuff like that. But the important part here, Android, like many other operating systems, uses the open source Linux kernel. There are several different types of Linux kernel releases, but the type that is most important to Android is the LTS or long-term support one, as they are updated regularly with important bug fixes and security patches. Starting back in 2017, the support lifetime of LTS releases was extended from 2 years to 6 years, but early last year, this extension was reversed. Fortunately, Google has announced that moving forward, they will support their own LTS kernel for 4 years. Our next Google story is pretty quick. Says Google expands dark web monitoring to all users. Google will extend its dark web monitoring service to all account holders starting in late July 2024, so here probably in a week or two. The feature, which scans for personal data comprised in breaches, was previously exclusive to Google One subscribers in dozens of countries. Either way, the catch here is you have to give Google a bunch of personal information, your name, your phone number, your address, but they will alert you if anything pops up. The last Google story is also quick. Google is adding passkey support for its most vulnerable users. They're talking about the Advanced Protection Program. The password killers known as passkeys are now available to users of the Advanced Protection Program. The company is more than a year into supporting passkeys for all regular individual accounts and has made them the default option to log in October. With the addition of passkeys, APP Product Manager points out that APP's defensive benefits will now be more usable and accessible to people around the world.
Next story is Apple. They have warned iPhone users in 98 countries of spyware attacks. So this is a round of threat notifications warning them of potential mercenary spyware attacks. It's the second such alert from the company this year, following a similar notification sent to users in 92 nations in April. Since 2021, Apple has been regularly sending these notifications, reaching users in over 150 countries. The latest warnings, out Wednesday, did not disclose the attackers' identities or the countries where users received notifications.
So once again, we did not have any research stories this week. All the universities are on summer break. We're going to jump into politics. We're going to start with Microsoft-owned ad tech Xandr is accused of EU privacy breaches. These come from our favorite people over in Noib, None of Your Business, which is a privacy watchdog over in Europe. They are accused of transparency failings and breaches of the data access rights to people in the bloc whose information is processed to create profiles that are used for micro-targeted advertising sold through programmatic ad options. The complaint also contends the ad tech company is using inaccurate information about people. Specifically, Noib alleges Xandr is breaching Articles 5.1c and d, 12.2, and 15 and 17 of the GDPR.
Germany is going to cut a deal with Huawei's role in 5G wireless network. So for context here, the German government and mobile phone carriers have agreed in principle on steps to phase components by Chinese tech companies out of the nation's 5G wireless network over the next 5 years. So this agreement gives network operators more time to replace critical parts, and under the preliminary agreement driven by security considerations, operators will initially rid the country's core network of 5G data centers of technology made by companies like Huawei and ZTE. So Germany is really trying to phase out the Chinese stuff. In a second phase, the role of the Chinese makers' parts for antennas, transmission lines, and towers should be all but eliminated by 2029.
That'll take us into our free and open source software news. Signal has come under fire for storing stuff. It focuses specifically on encryption keys, but it's really everything in plain text. There's a researcher who goes by Misk, and they created a simple Python script that copied Signal's local storage directory on a Mac, transferred this data to a fresh Mac OS installation in a virtual machine, and therefore were able to restore their entire Signal session, including chat histories. The researcher was then able to run 3 simultaneous active Signal sessions on the original Mac, an iPhone, and the virtual machine without any warning from Signal about the cloned session. Messages were delivered to either the Mac or VM, with the iPhone receiving all messages. Importantly, the iPhone still only showed one linked device. And this is not limited to Mac. A savvy user on Twitter was able to replicate the same thing on Linux, noting that the configuration file is set with permissions that make them readable by any process the local user runs. This issue has existed since at least 2018. There was a Bleeping Computer article where someone who worked at Signal kind of defended why they do this. And here's exactly what they said. SQL Cypher ships with a good default set of plugins in Pragmas, Pragmas, I don't know what that's short for, and its performance is excellent because it is built on top of the widely used SQLite database layer. The core premise of the article, he's talking about the 2018 Bleeping Computer article, is completely mistaken. The database key was never intended to be a secret. At-rest encryption is not something that Signal Desktop is currently trying to provide or has ever claimed to provide. Full disk encryption can be enabled at the OS level on most desktop platforms. The article goes on to say that considering this context, it is questionable why Signal stores chat histories in encrypted form at all, particularly since media attachments remain unencrypted. The authors were able to confirm that on a Windows system, Signal continues to store a key in the config.json file in the app data directory. So they do notice that this is not necessarily a unique problem. They said WhatsApp's chat content can also be accessed by any other app launched without restriction. iMessage, however, does store the data in a sandbox, preventing unauthorized processes from accessing it. In both cases, attackers must first gain access to the local user account. Once this access is obtained, other data is typically vulnerable as well, including stored documents that are usually unencrypted unless the users take specific measures. And then the article did note that on April 1st, a pull request was made on GitHub that would likely alleviate this problem by implementing Electron's safe storage API. And as a result of this whole controversy, the Signal is going ahead and rolling forward with that. So this article says 2 days ago at the time of publication, which was, I don't know, earlier this week, a Signal developer finally replied that they were implementing support for Electron safe storage, which would be available soon in an upcoming beta version. While the implementation is tested, Signal also includes a fallback mechanism to decrypt the database using legacy keys. The legacy key will be removed once the new feature is tested and stable.
Ghost federates its first newsletter. So Ghost says it has achieved 2 major milestones. Of note, it has federated its own newsletter, making it the first federated Ghost instance on the internet. You can follow the newsletter through a federated app at index@activitypub.ghost.org. The company does warn there will be bugs and issues as it continues to work on the platform's integration with ActivityPub. The other part of this is ActivityPub integration with Ghost is open source, so you can see this on GitHub. So, this kind of just joins lots of other organizations trying to hop on the ActivityPub train. We've seen a lot of other companies try to integrate with this. Even companies like Meta through Threads are trying to, in some ways, integrate with the Fediverse. So this is just one more step in that direction. Ghost itself has also attracted a lot of high-profile people, often because of Substack's moderation policies. Some people wanted to get away from too lax of moderation policies that they felt were on Substack, which includes people like Casey Newton from The Verge. But there are very popular people who do use Ghost, including 404 Media, Buffer, Kickstarter, David Sirota's The Lever, Tangle. And I believe Mozilla actually uses Ghost. At least they used to, because I remember they used to do that. That's something I was looking at.
We don't have any misfits either, so this is going to be our last story this week. Bitwarden releases phased beta for native mobile apps. So recently there was a blog post explaining how Bitwarden was going to completely rewrite their mobile application code. According to the article, it would allow Bitwarden to offer users more cutting-edge features, enhanced app performance, and deeper integration with native hardware capabilities, such as biometrics and multi-device support. Today, Bitwarden announces the beta rollout of its native applications for iOS and Android, with each subsequent phase introducing new functionalities and optimizations. For example, right now I think it doesn't include passkeys, and then in the next phase it will include passkeys, and then I think the phase after that is I forgot phase 3, ? And then phase 4 is profit. Phase 4 is production. So it's like 4 phases. They didn't give any hard timelines, but they did outline the different phases. That's all in the link, as well as links to join the public beta. So if you're one of those people who's I'm super ready for this, I don't need my passkeys, I'm willing to do without them for a few weeks, few months, whatever, I'm willing to put up with some bugs and help submit bug reports, then you can feel free to go join that.
And that's going to be it for the week. No misfits. So again, there was that huge AT&T data breach, as well as a lot of other data breaches. Google, unironically, had some fun news this week. There was that juicy Signal story. Honestly, I feel like we haven't seen the last of it. And so definitely stay subscribed. I'm sure there's going to be updates there and a lot more news. So again, if you like this podcast and you want to see more of it, we're on Patreon at patreon.com/surveillancepod. It's a great way to give back to this so that we can keep this going every week and giving you all some news. And it helps you all stay a little bit safer when you know what's going on in the world, because it's not your job to have to research all these stories. So hopefully we can help out there. If you don't like Patreon, we're also on LibrePay. No perks though. And don't forget about Monero. We see all the tips, so we really appreciate those tips as well. And again, just thanks for listening. And the links to all the stories can be found in the show notes. If you have a story you think you want us to cover, we have an email you can reach out to on our website. You can find that down in the description. And the final thing we want to ask you to do, it doesn't cost any money, but definitely share the podcast around. We don't do any kind of traditional marketing. We don't run ads. We don't do anything like that. So the best way to spread the word on our podcast is to share it around with people you know. Word of mouth, give us a rating, and all that good stuff really helps us out. So we really appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you all next week.